It's Larry Kotlikoff. I'm back or Seth Benzell is back with us. Seth is one of my all-time favorite and smartest students. He's a brilliant economist. He's at Chapman University, professor of economics. And it's great to have you back, Seth. Seth got his PhD at Boston University under my direction, I guess, and also got a BA from Tulane,
A BA and a BS, Larry.
BA and a BS at Tulane, and he's been working in the area of AI and also working with me and colleague Victor Yi on large-scale simulation models to try and understand how AI could impact the relative growth and economic power of different countries through time, different regions. And we're still working on that and making some progress. It's a tricky problem, but
Certainly.
Welcome, Seth. And let me start us out. We're going to really try and catch up on AI and some of your recent writings and thoughts and thinking. And my first question to kind of get us going here is that as of right this minute, we have 35% of the S&P comprising the AI and 10 AI companies. And these companies are making no profits. Their profits are negative.
Negative profits.
Negative profits. Now, we saw this with Amazon, no negative profits for many years, and look where Amazon is today. But some of these companies are selling for 100 times earnings. So a lot of people are
Or infinity times earnings if there's negative profits or
exactly,
negative earnings.
Yeah, exactly, infinity. So Andrew Sorkin, the famous financial writer, just came out with a book called 1929. And I heard him being interviewed on 60 Minutes last weekend, or the weekend before, where he was asked by Leslie Stahl, God bless her, she's 85 or 84, and she looks great, and she's still at it. So Leslie asked her whether this could be 1929, and he didn't say for sure, but he said possibly, I think, to paraphrase him. So do you think these companies are overvalued? Do you think we're in for a crash that could bring down the entire financial system at some level? We saw a 53% decline in the stock market just in 2008, which is not that far ago. That's less than 20 years. And could these? I mean, the other, part of my concern here is not so much that this going to be a replication of Amazon as the issue that these companies seem to be doing the same thing, and they don't seem to have anything special that nobody else can come in and produce. These large language models are terrific. They can answer a lot of questions for us. They can save a lot of time with search. They can make out all kinds of documents for us. So that's fantastic, but they all can do this. All 10 of them seem to be able to do it to some degree or another. Some do it better, depending on the particular issue. So how do these companies actually make money to justify being 35% of the value of the S&P? Take it away, Seth.
Well, Larry, let me say thank you so much for that incredibly gracious introduction and this provocative question to start us off, which I think we might end up spending this entire conversation unpacking. It's been an honor working with you over many years, and in particular, thinking back to us working on these questions of macroeconomic and long-term impacts of automation back in 2014, 2015, when generative AI and all these new waves of technologies weren't even on people's radars, where, image recognition and taking a picture of a bird and being able to say, this is a picture of a bird, that would have been considered beyond the pale when we were starting out. And now we have these AI agents that are capable of writing books, diagnosing illnesses. You can give the whole litany of the things they at least seem to be capable of.
Right.
So now to circle around to your question. So there's this question of why are we getting these tremendous investments in AI, both in terms of why are these AI companies making these giant physical investments? So, for example, OpenAI has announced $2 trillion in infrastructure expenditure. And then, like on the financial side, why are we enabling them? Why do we keep on giving them the money to make these giant investments? Presumably, the investors think that there's some chance of a big payoff, right?
Right.
I think it's important for us to make a positive case. So you kind of gave us the negative case. Is this the financial crisis all over again? Maybe a better analogy might be to the internet bubble, where people were correct that the internet was the future, but still plenty of people got wiped out because it wasn't the future yet. They got invested in a generation of technologies that kind of maybe became superseded, or firms that later and models that became superseded. Okay. So let's take a step back. What's the positive argument for making these giant investments in AI on the order of trillions of dollars? If there's one concept that I think your audience should know that is in the back of the heads of Dario Amodei, Sam Altman, all the people running these big companies, and then the people who are financing them, it's a principle called the scaling law. The scaling law is something that first became discovered around 2018, 2019, which found that or even a little bit earlier, but it really came to prominence in 2022 with the jump from ChatGPT 2 to ChatGPT 3. And the scaling hypothesis is the following. It's that if you have a big enough neural net and you just double the amount of compute that you're throwing at it, or equivalently double the amount of memory, or double the amount of good data that you're giving to it, the scaling law proposes a predictable relationship between the additional compute and how much better the model gets at kind of objectively doing well at predicting the next token. So all of our large language models, all of our generative AIs, so that's everything from ChatGPT, that's, playing chatbot with you, to something like Codex, which is doing automated coding, to something like these Sora models that do automated image generation. All of those are sitting on top of this really big predictive model that's just kind of predicting what the next word in a book would be, what the next image in a movie would be, right? And so again, one sentence, the scaling law is the discovery that if you double the amount of compute, you get a consistently improvement in how well you do at those tasks, right? Okay, why is this economically interesting? The reason that this is economically interesting is it really kind of seems like getting better at predicting the next image, getting better at predicting the next word is 90%, is 95% of the work in making a super actually economically useful AI model, right? The moment in which this became clear, the kind of the eureka moment for a lot of people working in AI, and this is recorded in Dwarkesh Patel's new book, An Oral History of the Scaling Era, which just came out, highly recommended, from Stripe Press. He was writing about this. And he says that this was kind of a hypothesis inside OpenAI with GPT-2. It's like, oh, as we start giving this more data, more compute, it starts going from like less of a toy to more of a useful thing. And then going from GPT-2, which was trained on maybe a couple of $100,000 versus of compute, versus ChatGPT-3, which was trained on a couple $1 million of compute, going from billions of parameters to 100 billion parameters, the model got way better. And so that's the hypothesis. The hypothesis is if we go up a couple more orders of magnitude in investment in these models, they'll get a couple of order of magnitude better. And if you look at how at least seemingly practical and how quickly diffusing these technologies already have, and maybe later in our conversation, we can talk a little bit about the empirics of kind of what is the dollar value of tasks that we think can be automated by current generation automation. The hypothesis is, after a couple, after pouring $1 trillion on this instead of, a few million, we'll get something that is, truly superhuman. And the people who are pouring the most money into this just have that curve of AI quality as you pour in resources going all the way up to the moon.
But doesn't this, I mean, there is a limit to truth as readable by these AI, these large language models, because I mean, I have this financial planning software company. I know what our software is producing. I know that the AI models are not being trained on it because they would have to be running our model a zillion times, and we wouldn't let them without charging them $1 zillion. Uh, so I know what they're doing is if they're giving financial advice, uh, uh, they're reading the financial advice from other models, which I don't think much of. I don't think they're financial truth or direction. And then there's some calculations that just can't be done by this kind of structure, I believe.
Uh,
Now, I
So this is a great point. So
awesome.
Larry, so you have a vision, and obviously I agree with you, a vision of how people should optimally save for retirement, for example, right?
Well, I wouldn't say it's my vision. I would say it's economics vision. Let's think about expected lifetime utility maximization. That's a very clear problem. We write it down in mathematical terms, but solving it requires a certain technology, algorithms, just like I guess you could say, well, this thing could be so smart to figure out anything at all, but
Do
does
you want
that,
a snarky answer? I mean, I'm tempted to give you a snarky answer, Larry, which is you have multiple employees working on this software, right?
yeah.
You think none of them have ever plugged it in the raw code into ChatGPT?
The raw code? No, they would never do that.
Well, I don't know. A lot of people are lazy and would get a little bit of speed up, would be happy to do that.
No, no, not the people work
All
for
right, very trustworthy. But let's
the,
set that aside. Let's set aside my
I only have
snarky
like
concern.
3 engineers, so, and I know them, but like in my, they're like back of my hand. So
I know
absolutely,
you love them, Larry, but you might imagine a bigger organization. At a bigger organization, you might think there is no such thing as code that ChatGPT doesn't know about. That's kind of a silly answer. Let me give you my more serious answer.
okay.
My more serious answer is the theory is that as we pour enough orders of magnitude of intelligence into this thing, if you correctly prompted it with using the highest quality economic models of intertemporal optimization, help me build a model for optimal intertemporal saving and spending. And yeah, and maybe not tomorrow it wouldn't be able to, but the idea is that as these models get bigger, you'll be able to give them larger and more abstract tasks. So right now, maybe you could prompt ChatGPT with that and be like, well, the things I would worry about are, your income stream, this and that, and I can do a little toy simulation for you. But maybe in a year or two, or actually today, probably a vibe coder working with the AI could get there much faster than a coder working on their own. And then the idea is that eventually you just have the AI doing it by itself. But yes, there's going to be a long period where this is really just a tool to speed up coding, right?
Yeah, well, knowing the structure of the algorithm, I don't, and knowing the structure of neural networks, I don't think the two are necessarily,
My
I think,
understanding is that neural nets can approximate any function.
what?
My understanding is neural nets can approximate any function.
Uh, okay, but
And then they could call an API. I mean, if it's as simple as, as one of the steps, you have to take a complicated integral. I mean, one of the things that goes on with making these models more useful is building them tools to other places. So maybe they can go to Wolfram Alpha and compute the complicated integral and then come back to the main AI system, right?
uh, okay, it may be that at some point they will be able to
At some point, the company is making these investments. You asked me to make the case for why we should invest trillions and trillions of dollars in these things.
Yep.
Sam Altman thinks that I'm going to be able to give this prompt in 2 or 3 years and we're going to get max fi out of it. God forbid, but that's the claim.
Want more money, less risk, and a better life? Buy Money Magic, a new book by Laurence Kotlikoff, Boston University economist, personal finance expert, and best-selling author. Whether it's education, career, marriage, housing, investing, retirement, Social Security, IRA, or 401k decisions, Money Magic delivers scores of secrets to raise your living standard. Financial journalist Jane Bryant Quinn says Money Magic is a must-read. Nobel laureate George Akerlof says Money Magic is quite probably the best financial advice book ever written. Financial guru John Malden says, you'll love this amazing book. It's full of wit, wisdom, and startling paths to a better financial life. And columnist Scott Burns calls Money Magic a funny, brilliant read, offering wildly powerful, unconventional choices that can literally change your life. Get Laurence Kotlikoff's Money Magic today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent booksellers.
Well, that would that'd be interesting. Uh, yeah, I don't see it because I don't see that you can train. They would need to know the right answer in order to train an AI system to get these billions of coefficients to be the right value. You have to give it the right answer in order for it to predict, for a given set of inputs to predict the right, and they won't have
Right,
the
but the
right
question
answer.
is, can it then go
That's
meta, right? So you're imagining you're going to give it a lot of examples of correct investment strategies, right? And it's going to learn the algorithm from the lots of examples.
yeah,
They're thinking that it's going to figure out the algorithm from a meta of how our algorithms generated.
yeah. Uh, well, that's I guess
That's the claim. Now,
yeah.
we're all right to be a little bit skeptical. Tech CEOs have overpromised to us in the past, right? And if you want a more skeptical take on the current investment boom, one thing that Bloomberg has been covering a lot is a lot of these investments have been kind of happening in sketchy off-book transactions, where, for example, OpenAI will put in some finance, NVIDIA will throw in some chips, and it'll be like a special corporation with its own assets that is just owned jointly by OpenAI and NVIDIA, and might be very opaque in terms of is this data center going to make money or lose money? That kind of stuff is kind of sketchy. Why doesn't everybody just do it on their official books? You might be and I'll give you one last thing that you might think, okay, maybe
Just
go ahead,
let me
please.
make sure I understand that. You're
Yeah, yeah.
saying, give me the sketchy thing again.
Yeah, so there's been a bunch of coverage of how exactly the finance is working between these different AI companies, right? So the big boys, NVIDIA, OpenAI, Oracle. And often the way it works is not OpenAI says, I will give you this, I will take this much money from investors and give that much money to buy chips. And that all happen in a way that is on NVIDIA's books. Rather, NVIDIA and or OpenAI books, one of the two companies' books. Rather, the two of them make and invent a third company that's going to be the data center that's going to, have the combination of the chips and the AI that is much more opaque that both of them own.
It's opaque in the sense of what?
Opaque in the sense of it might not have the disclosure needs of a public company.
Oh, you mean it's a private,
Right,
okay, okay. So they could have major liabilities or they could be that are off the books and we're back to 2008. So,
right.
okay, keep going.
Okay, so that's one reason to be concerned. Let me give you a more theoretical reason to think that, AI, where you type in a sentence, recreate Max 5 for me tomorrow, and it doesn't immediately work tomorrow. Like, why wouldn't you? Here's a theoretical reason for why that's not around the corner. Larry, if I told you that tomorrow the US economy will become incredibly productive and you will get, free subsidies from the government and, negative transfers and consumption will be really, really cheap tomorrow.
Positive transfers.
You're going to have positive transfers from the government. You're going to
Yeah.
get all of this free money in the future. Today, are you going to save more or are you going to save less?
Say less.
You'll save less. You should dissave if you're anticipating a future of great abundance.
Right.
Now, similarly, imagine that tomorrow you think the world is going to be destroyed by Terminator robots, right? Like these horrible god machines that are going to wipe out all of humanity. But it's going to happen tomorrow. Are you going to save more today or are you going to save less?
Save less.
You'll save less. So the way that an argument from my MIT colleague Basil Halperin, he's actually at the Stanford Digital Economy Lab right now with me for a year before he moves on to University of Virginia to work on theoretical macro issues with Anton Koronek and the group there. What he argues is the following. Hey, look, if tomorrow AI is going to be really, really good for output or really, really bad for output, either way, people should be dissaving today, and we should see, reductions in investment and increases in interest rates, right? We don't see that. I don't know. Interest rates are coming down a little bit for like Federal Reserve reasons, nominal interest rates, but we certainly don't see real interest rates exploding, as would be suggested by a naive model of what does the eucatastrophe or catastrophe look like a few, 2, 3, 4 years from now. So to answer your question, Larry, why are people making these huge investments? Well, some of them are true believers that we're really going to get something even more magical, even more amazing than we can really wrap our heads around now, just a couple of years down the road. And in that case, you're not pinching your pennies, you're fighting to be on board. Or you're imagining kind of a more intermediate case where, the world doesn't end. We still have a normal economy. Maybe we're growing at 3 or 4 or 5 percentage points of growth instead of 2 percentage points of growth annually. In which case, like, every trillion kind of counts, right? And, a technology that adds 1 percentage point to the GDP growth rate, that's worth trillions of dollars, but it's not worth an unlimited amount of trillions of dollars. And so we can talk in a little bit about kind of like economically, how do people predict money values there?
So are you getting back to this issue of saving, which means if there's less saving, there's less investment, and there's less money to go into these companies. So are you saying that the concern, which is what we have in our paper, Robots Are Us, which I wrote about in my Substack column recently.
An excellent read.
Oh, thank you. It's a joint paper with you and Guillermo Lagarda, another former grad student, also terrific. He'll be on the podcast shortly, talking about Mexico and its relations and its economy but
must listen audio.
Yeah, but is this argument that there's not going to be enough, let's say, capital for the code to work with? Is that is this a version of our
Well, so so I would describe his theory as compatible with our theory. Yes, in a model where one negative consequence of people dissaving in advance of AI arriving might be less physical capital available for humans to work with and depressed wages even beyond what would have happened otherwise.
Yeah. On the other hand, things are so uncertain, and the uncertainty about losing your job could lead people to save a lot, more.
I think this is what Basil leaves out, right? Is
Yeah.
that he tells a really beautiful story, like it's really compelling, but at the individual level, the idiosyncratic uncertainty might be more important a driver of savings than this aggregate uncertainty.
So tell us about you had, I think, three topics you wanted to cover right away at the beginning.
Yeah.
Or,
So you
what's
asked
number
me
two after the scaling?
after the scaling law. Okay. So
there's the
in
double
very
percent.
short.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Very shortly, if you want to understand why has AI been so, this new generation of generative AI been so impactful, like what are kind of the underlying mathematical ideas that are important, I would quickly name 3 things. One we already talked about, it's the scaling law, which seems to be that in this over-parameterization regime, that's the technical term for the fact that we have so much compute that we have orders of magnitude more compute than we have actual data, right? This is something people don't realize, and that's something I didn't realize for a long time. People think, oh, they're reading the entire internet. There's got to be so much data. But that's not the case, right? Rather, these models have hundreds of billions of parameters, but all of the internet, all of Wikipedia, plus all of books, plus all of what they've scraped is maybe a few billion tokens, right? So we are in a kind of a really weird statistical regime right now, where in these models we have way more parameters than we have data, right? This
Overfitting.
is this is very odd, right? I don't know, Larry, when you were taking statistics back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, did they ever tell you about something called the bias variance trade-off? Have you heard that expression?
Uh,
Maybe.
not
I'll
exactly.
explain it to the
Maybe I think
audience.
we
I'm
use
sure you
different
know. I'm
words.
going to
Yeah.
remind the audience. The
Okay.
bias variance trade-off is, so like you have a simple model, you run a linear regression through it, you'll do okay at predicting out of sample, right? But then what happens is, if you have like 100 data set points and you do it, you'll have an okay model. But if you have 3 or 4 or 5 coefficients trying to explain 100 data points, you're going to end up with this crazy overfit model that like is terrible out of sample, right? This is the idea that if you have a small amount of data, you don't want to throw too many parameters at it or you'll be overfit. That's the
Right.
bias variance trade-off.
All right.
But there's this thing that was discovered called double descent. And what this is it turns out the models get, as you add, let's say you have 100 data points, the models get worse and worse as you go from 5 parameters, 6 parameters, 7 parameters, 8 parameters, all the way to 100 parameters. At 100 parameters, you're just memorizing the data. But then you keep going, Larry. You keep going. You keep adding more parameters, more layers of the neural network. And
Mhm.
eventually you've got 100 parameters for every data point. And instead of just memorizing each data point, somehow, by a miracle of statistics, the model starts getting better again. It seems to start understanding the latent manifold that connects all of the actual data points. It's very, as far as I know, there's not super thought out statistical theory for why this happens. It just seems to be a brute empirical fact that people are still trying to understand. And so once you hit this double descent in the overparameterization regime, then you hit the scaling law. Questions, or can I give you the third thing?
Give me a third. Well, like, I do have a question, which is, you know, it's one thing to say we have these data that are actual facts and truth. It's another to know that a good chunk of this data that they're being taught on is garbage.
It's Redditors. I mean, that's part of the game is trying to like overweight better data than less good data. You might, when you train the model, you might run the books through 5 times and you might run Reddit through 1 time, right? So that's one way of reweighting the data is you might like multiply a data set you like more and show it a couple more times. So that's one answer is if you think a book is more reliable than Reddit, you might throw it through the model more times and it'll like overweight on the book. And then
Mhm.
the second thing is, remember how I said that 95% of the hard part is just predicting the next token? This
Yeah.
is like the last 5%. The last 5% that makes these models go from incredibly good at predicting the next word on the internet to actual tools is the reinforcement learning with human feedback that we talked about in our last conversation, right? You don't want, if I ask the model who is George Washington, we don't want the model to come back to me with who is Abraham Lincoln, right? Even though that's a plausible next thing to read in a book after who is George Washington, maybe the next thing in the book is who is Abraham Lincoln. It's very plausible, right? But it's not useful. So what the reinforcement learning with human feedback is, it gives the model a bunch of examples of someone being correct and helpful. It then kind of congratulates the model whenever it is correct and helpful. This is, like we talked about, done with large bodies of Zoom workers in middle-income countries like Nigeria and India. And from there, it gets a sense of what does it mean for an answer to be helpful, right? Now, you might still, okay, but that middle income person in India and Nigeria, maybe they know what a helpful answer is, but how do they know what a correct math answer is, right? This is the ongoing work. So as we speak, if you are a PhD mathematician in our audience, OpenAI would love to hire you for hundreds of dollars an hour to check math answers for them, so you can give feedback, human-based feedback to these models and actually kind of point them in the space of possible continuations, where's like the true useful space of continuations rather than a plausible continuation.
Let's talk about retirement for a minute. It's something Americans think about regularly. Ask yourself, how financially secure do you really feel? Do you have enough money to retire? How much is really enough? And if you don't have enough money, how can you possibly find that extra money before you do retire? These are all tough questions. My retirement software, Maxify Planner, is the powerful online planning tool that takes the guesswork out of retirement. It weighs your assets against your fixed expenses to calculate how much you can safely spend every year for the rest of your life based on when you decide to retire. And it shows you safe ways to find more money. Maxify makes a complicated problem like retirement planning simple. It's accurate, easy to use, and produces what you really seek, peace of mind. So make the smart choice and visit Maxify.com today. Don't miss this opportunity. That's Maxify with an I, M-A-X-I-F-I, Maxify.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. By the way, I think just for people that are not that familiar with how these large language models work, and you tell me if this characterization is too gross. I mean, if you're trying to relate Y against X1 and, like income against education and parent and dad's education and mom's education and uncle's education, lots of variables, and where you grew up and what quality school you went to. So lots of right-hand side explanatory variables, and there's going to be coefficients in front of them. And that's a linear regression. We try to find the best coefficients that make the difference between the value of somebody's income and the predictions based on the coefficients multiplied by those variables.
Right.
If you take that difference and you square it and you do that for all the different observations, you want to try and get the coefficients to make that difference as small as possible. That's linear regressions. And then neural networks are saying, well, let's make those coefficients themselves a very complicated function of the same inputs, but also other coefficients multiplying. And we're talking about very nonlinear.
Right. They can interact with each other in all sorts of ways. It could be these three parameters multiplied plus this. Yeah, you can do anything with each other. Yeah.
And then that's one layer, but then we have the next layer would be that the coefficients in the first layer are themselves super complicated functions of interactions of coefficients and variables.
And so you have all these intermediate steps that go in through you think of all these matrices of parameters, right? You can think of a layer of a neural net as a matrix of parameters. We pour the information through, it gets affected by the first matrix of parameters, then the second matrix of parameters. And the hope is, this is called interpretability research, is to try to understand what's happening in each layer. And when it comes to, for example, image recognition neural nets, the first layers kind of identify simple things like here's a straight line versus a curve, whereas a more complex layer would notice if you have a series of curves in the right order, it makes a number 5, right? And you can imagine the models building up to more and more abstract topics as you move through them.
How do you know that the first layer is, all you're doing is feeding the picture.
Yeah, this is actually cool. So this is called a perceptron. So these were invented in the 1980s, if you remember, like your automated mail reading. And so like literally the way this works is the image, so like you're writing the number 5 in your zip code. That image of the number 5 gets put into a grid, and it's like empty point, filled in point, empty point, right? It goes into the neural net. The neural net then will have, let's say the first layer of the neural net looks for straight lines versus curves, right? And so one of the neurons will look in the top left corner, is there a curve? Okay. In the space immediately to the right of the top left corner, is there a curve? And it'll look everywhere in this board, where are there curves? And it'll turn out that there's filled in curves in such and such points. And then, yeah, and so on.
So what makes it what makes it the first layer that does this as opposed to the second or the nth?
Oh, because the first layer gets the raw information, right? So the first layer is getting, here's the picture. And
Yeah.
then the second layer is getting some information that you extracted from the picture. So like imagine a two-layer perceptron. The first layer detects where are the curves, and then the second layer guesses what number it is. So let's say
the second layer is doing its optimization given the coefficients of the first layer.
right, yeah. So there's this value that's being poured through all of these matrices. Yeah.
I got it. Okay. So you can try and figure out where the thing is focused on the different aspects. So you've talked about the scaling law and the double descent. What about the bitter lesson? What is
The
that?
bitter lesson. So when I was studying under you, Larry, one of the big open questions I felt was like the most important question is, what is the elasticity of the scientific project progress to the direction of science? In other words, like, can we as a society decide that we want like less military research and more medical research, and then somehow like redistribute funds such that we'll get one more cure for cancer and one less bomb, for example, right? So to what extent is scientific progress sort of elastic to what we decide to focus on, right? Richard Sutton is a very famous computer scientist, and he was working back in the days on trying to, this is like working in like the late 2010s, he was working on kind of applications of neural nets to different specific topics, right? So I want to apply a neural net towards, reading letters on an envelope. I want to apply a neural net towards medicine. I want to apply, all these different applications. And what he found is that you'd spend like a year optimizing the current generation of neural net for your specific task. And then in the meantime, everybody else who's just working on the general tool has made a medical AI that's better than yours when you spent a year focusing on medical AI. The bitter lesson is that you get more AI progress just by focusing on anything that leverages more compute, anything that's scalable is always going to win because of Moore's law. Because of Moore's law, you get twice as much compute for free every 2 years. So if you have a strategy that can get consistently better as there's more compute, you're always going to outrun people who are making bespoke innovations. So this is called the bitter lesson because you might hope that we could have a future where instead of researching military AI, we research health AI. And it turns out that that kind of doesn't seem to be like the world that we're in. The bitter lesson is you just get better AI. That's the best way to do things.
I guess I'm not quite getting it. You're saying that say it a different way.
Let me give you a different example. So
Yeah.
let me give you an example from a paper that I'm going to explain in a little bit. So I think this is a perfect transition to, I don't know, Larry, let me transition to this other topic and then I will come back and answer your question. So, Larry, as you previously mentioned, I do have a podcast. It's called Justified Posteriors. It's the
Right.
podcast that updates its beliefs about the economics of AI and technology.
Excellent podcast.
It's an excellent podcast with Andre Fradkin.
And you can subscribe
And
to it. What's the URL for it?
Justified Posteriors. We're on Substack. If you Google Justified Posteriors in
Justified,
Spotify,
justified posteriors, right?
right? Yeah. So like a Bayesian, you're going to justify your posterior.
Okay. All right.
I know it's a
Maybe if you
dubious okay, but people
just
find it
Google
fun. The
Seth,
other reason is that we're
yeah,
both a little anal, and self-righteous, so we're justified posteriors.
or just maybe this Seth Benzell. You can see the name right here, and Substack. You'll come to that, and you can sign up, get a subscription.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
so what your users will see is that a recent episode was on OpenAI's recent paper called GDP Val. So what
Okay.
OpenAI is trying to do in this paper is build a gold standard of tasks in the economy and try to figure out how many of them their AI can actually do. So rather than speaking in the abstract level, so I think the last time I was on, Larry, we talked about a paper from 2023 by my colleague Daniel Rock, Lindau et al., GPTs or GPTs, that at an abstract level tried to figure out, okay, what sort of occupations do we think are more substitutable with the AI, which are less? That was an abstract exercise. Here, what they're actually doing is they get 1,200 specific occupation times industry level jobs that they solicit from actual industry experts. So examples are like, design a winch and make a PowerPoint presentation explaining how the winch works. Do sales clerk ordering and reconcile these two documents, like actually economic tasks. They get all of them. Then for 220 of them, they had different AI systems try to do the task. And then they compared it to how human experts did the task, right? So,
Okay.
one of the tasks is, you are an accountant. Here are the two sets of books. They seem to not line up. Try to figure out what's going on between the two sets of books, right? And so they had, for example, the OpenAI model ChatGPT 5 versus a human expert. And then they asked a different human expert, hey, we're not going to tell you which one of these is AI and which one of these is humans. Who did a better job at doing this plausible work task? For the 220 knowledge economy jobs that they identify, tasks that OpenAI identified. Oh, and by the way, this must have been a very expensive study. This must have been like a $10 million study because they're paying lots of human experts lots of time to do these tasks and judge these tasks.
Okay.
What they find is Claude beats the human expert at these 220 tasks 40% of the time, over 40% of the time. So, at least within a selected subset of tasks, which, if you kind of add up the median wage of the people in these occupations times the hours it takes to do these tasks, the suggestion is that it is, $1 or $2 trillion annually of tasks that are just like straight up automatable, right? According to this study. And the study goes into lots of interesting details about which sorts of occupations is the win rate for the AI higher. As you might imagine, the win rate for the AI is higher in like pure coding stuff and pure sort of writing stuff. Whereas tasks that are a little bit more synthetic, that involve some like context or coordination, they're not going to do as well at. Um, and then another interest. Okay, so why did I bring this up? Why did I bring it up at this point?
And how does it connect to the bitter
The
lesson?
bitter lesson. So they do two things. One thing they do is they ask how much different in terms of success are GPT-4 versus GPT-5. So just going up an order of magnitude in model size versus what they call scaffolding. So if you're someone who's kind of seriously trying to integrate AI into your workflow, you're not going to just prompt it once and say, hey AI, make me Maxify. Okay, bye. Right? You wouldn't do that. You would try to iterate with a bunch of times, see what prompts kind of worked. You would try to give it additional context that turned out to be important. If it turned out to error in a certain way, often you would be like, hey, be sure not to make this common error. And basically, you would try to scaffold it with what you saw as like, here are some common ways the AI screws up, and here are some hints about how to do the job, right? It turns out, this is the bitter lesson, it turns out like the difference between the best and worst prompt you can give the AI is maybe like 10 percentage points in win rate. But the difference in terms of going from GPT-4 to GPT-5 is like 20 percentage points of win rate. So in other words, the generic quality improvement seems to be much more important than specific task customization.
Or is another way to say this that having more truthful data is not as important as having more uh, more ways to process, more power to process the existing data?
That's not exactly right, because when we're thinking about what's the difference between GPT-4 and GPT-5, though GPT-5 both has more in its pre-training, GPT both 5 has both more parameters, more compute on those parameters, and took in more data in pre-training. So it had all of more of that, right? The
Right.
difference is between GPT-4 with someone who's really good at prompting and knows exactly how AI models screw up and is like trying their best to make sure it works good versus GPT-5 with someone lazily saying, do this job.
I'd like to talk to you about a really powerful financial planning tool to help you make smart retirement and other critical financial decisions. It's a tool that factors in all your financial data and shows you what you can sustainably spend every year for the rest of your life. That tool is my software company's Maxify Planner. It's incredibly powerful, it's accurate, and it's easy to use. Maxify takes the guesswork out of financial decisions at every stage of life. Its focus is on raising, de-risking, and sustaining your living standard. Maxify lets you run what-if scenarios to see how your finances will change in taking new jobs, buying a home, doing Roth conversions, retiring early, downsizing, investing more in the market, you name it. Knowing the impact of these decisions before you make them is the secret to making smarter decisions. And it's also the secret to what we all seek, which is financial peace of mind. So please visit Maxify.com today to start planning. That's Maxify with an I, Maxify.com, Maxify.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. Okay. Now,
So that's the bitter lesson, which
Right.
is these are all, I don't know, this is all stuff I wouldn't have been able to predict 5, 6 years ago.
right. Okay. Now, you also have some work on the issue of AI and deficits
Mm.
you've talked about. So, you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, so one thing you guys will find on my Substack if you head over there is I was provoked recently uh, in the context of the recent Big Beautiful Bill budget negotiations. There was a lot of talk about the people in government at the time seemed really excited about and hyped about this sort of transformative AI vision that we were just talking about. So a world in which trillions of dollars of labor every year is on the verge of being automated. Like significant percentage points of human work is being automated. And you think about Elon Musk at Department of Government Efficiency was talking, was informed in these negotiations. You think about David Sachs, who's sort of the White House's AI czar. These guys are all kind of totally sold on this Leopold Aschenbrenner vision of AI is going to change everything in 5 years, right? But there was a lot of surus. I don't know if your audience knows what surus is. There's a lot of anxiety around government deficits. And so a lot of people are asking the question, if we think transformative AI is around the corner, how should that impact the way that we worry about government deficit spending? I don't know, Larry, had you been thinking about that question? That's something that people were asking me.
Well, I mean, obviously, any technology that could dramatically improve, uh, increase output, uh, given, could make the government's debt irrelevant. If we could double, debt to GDP is currently 120%. If we could quadruple GDP just by magic, uh, then it would be going down to like 25% of GDP, uh, and it would disappear as a problem. And
Right. So that's the good news, Larry. So as you might imagine, so we are working on a simulation of what the economy, macro, like you said, we've been working on macroeconomic simulation for a long time of trying to understand how new technologies will impact the economy. And
Right.
so we asked just that question. So what if a technology comes along that is truly transformative in the sense that approximately half the jobs in the economy we can replace with labor, right? Um, you use the word magical. It wouldn't be quite magical. You'd have to make lots of capital investments to get there, to really make advantage of that new technology. But In our simulations, we suggest a technology like that would boost the US economic growth rate from 2 to 3 percentage points a year to something like 4 to 6 percentage points a year. So basically doubling the US growth rate as this wave of automation plays out.
Mm.
As you point out, if the US is able to automate in that way and have the capital investments to take advantage, the headline story is that should make deficits more manageable. However, I do have some caveats to throw at your audience about why you might not necessarily think that that means that we shouldn't worry about deficits anymore. The first thing I would throw at them is you might imagine that the rise of AI-driven productivity could lead to new demands on government spending. So sure, we'll have a lot more resources in transformative AI world, but we might have an AGI race or an arms race with China. There might be huge costs in terms of keeping on the dole vast numbers of people who are unemployed. So you have to think there might also be huge costs associated with transformative AI as well. A second concern you might have is that the wealth created by AI technologies might be difficult to tax. So sure, OpenAI might be automating all these jobs and creating all of this wealth and getting all of this profit from that, 4 or 5 years from now. But to the extent that the servers or the workers can be located in a tax haven, that might be hard to get at. A third consideration is what we were just talking about, which is along the way, interest rates might go up before the productivity gains. Like we just discussed, if people are going to be dissaving because they're anticipating amazing economic times in the future, that can, that can make the transition along the way more painful because interest rates go up, the government debt becomes less sustainable. Those caveats aside, AI booms would make the US government more sustainable. But to me, I guess my last point. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't know. I mean, well, there's the big
Please.
caveat is people lose their jobs.
Yeah.
They don't have any wherewithal to save or to invest. And then these AI company, and we have to start raising taxes on the AI owners, and they start moving out of the country.
Right. That's the problem. The
And
problem is if the AI wealth is untaxable, then you got a big problem.
yeah, and then so we're like in the end kind of like Jamaica. We have a lot of hotels owned by foreigners, a lot of poor people, and uh, a
I
lot
mean,
of
it's funny that you say that because you know how Dario Amodi describes the next generation of AI is he describes it as a country of geniuses on the cloud. So you can imagine we're the Jamaica economy trading with the country of geniuses on the cloud.
yeah, right, yeah. The distribution of the resources, especially in a world where there's mobility and you can buy your own island, whatever. Greece has something like 2,000 islands. If I
Yeah,
go,
just go buy. Yeah, so that's Sam Altman. Sam Altman, this is a pro tip from Larry and me. Go buy a nice island in Greece, declare
right,
a tax haven. You'll thank us later.
Onassis, who was married to Jacqueline Kennedy, forget what his first name was at this point, uh, had his own island in the. Sorry, that's why I said it in
They're
Greece.
not that expensive. They
Yeah,
got a lot of them, dude. I say let's get over there. Yeah, so that's a big concern. And I guess maybe a related concern is even if the US will do fine as might or could do fine in terms of deficits as a result of this change, other countries are going to be in a really, really tough position. If you think about a country like Mexico, which a lot of its investment is going to the US anyway, you can imagine a future where like for example, OpenAI workers have to live somewhere. So maybe they have to live in America, right? This is maybe a less severe version of the Jamaica economy, but they don't have to live in Mexico. And so Mexico might see a lot of its low-skilled labor get automated without a national AI champion to collect tax revenue from. And so this is going to be a real challenge for countries in that sort of position.
there's also the issue. I don't know whether this is playing into your thinking or modeling, but there's the issue of whether these companies are actually have anything unique relative to each other, where they can actually, and what is to keep another, some we already have
Just from training the next bigger model.
And this is like 10 and it's one thing to have Amazon, which, made its network, and somehow it's easy for people to click on to buy things because it's all set up and they had first mover advantage. Somehow they got there. Uh, Maybe Facebook, same story, but here we have people actively searching. They don't know which Amazon in effect to go to. We've got 10 already. We could have 20 in a couple of weeks.
They say there's usually people say about 7 mega hyperscalers. There's about 7 who are trying to make these really giant models.
Okay, so seven's a lot of competition,
Yeah.
and that can force down the cost. So it could be that,
So the question is, Larry, will there be one model to rule them all?
well, yeah, I kind of doubt that. But also,
But the bitter
you know,
lesson kind of suggests
will there
that just the
be other
biggest model will
jobs?
win.
Well, even if I'm right that these companies might compete themselves down, in some ways close to out of business or just, making some normal profit. If they can take over the jobs, there may be no jobs left for humans, or a lot of the jobs that we now uh, connect to humans. I mean, why not go to AI to have a bot teach you macroeconomics rather than having me do it at Boston
Oh, well,
University?
why? Because of your charming and unique presence, Larry.
Maybe the bot can learn it, from other people
Impossible.
teaching. Uh, and so lots of jobs could go away, just like the jobs of horses went away, and we could be automated out of kind of business as
Right.
humans. That's the kind of fundamental big
So you want
question.
to talk about the asymptotic. So what happens
Let's
when
talk
these
about
models
that
become
as
superhuman
we
in
end.
everything?
Yeah, we have to end up here, close up, but tell me about that scenario.
Yeah, we got to talk about sex robots before the meeting's over, of course. All right.
Sex robots.
Well, I mean, you said everything, dude.
What's the sex robot story?
Well, you might imagine that we always talk about what can't be automated. So I'll tell you an interesting story about it. This will be the last thing we talk about. There was recently a transformative AI conference that got together the leading lights on the subject, asked them all to just assume we have transformative AI. Don't doubt the premise. Assume that it's coming around the corner. We'll be able to automate all jobs, right? And Pasquale Restrepo, who friend of ours, faculty at Yale now, has a paper called "We Won't Be Missed." And so he tries to deal with this. Okay, what would it look like in a world where AIs are truly superhuman in every task? So first of all, you might question the premise. So let me give you an example, Larry. Um, I just did my son's Pidyon Haben. Have you ever heard of a Pidyon Haben?
No.
So a Pidyon Haben is a Jewish ceremony that you do for your firstborn son if you're not a Kohen or a Levi, where you buy them out of obligation to the temple. So you have to find a Kohen and give them 3 silver coins
I see. Okay.
in order to buy your child out of slavery. Uh, so you might imagine that that's a job that asymptotically cannot be done by a robot, right? Because a robot cannot accept a Pidyon Haben payment. So the first answer is you might imagine just definitionally in the asymptote, there's always going to be a job. Even if like the robots can do everything, there might be religious customs, legal reasons that you need a human to do the thing. That's just silly. You can think of lots of examples. But in what Pasquale's model, Pasquale eschews that. And he says, okay, asymptotically, the AI is getting better and better and better at everything. Where does that leave humans? What he points out is that over time, humans will be pushed out of any work that's bottlenecking, right? So if you imagine that output is some sort of complementary process of like different AI tasks and then plus something else, the claim is that humans will be pushed out of all the complementary tasks because as AI gets faster and faster, like humans will increasingly bottleneck stuff. So you want to push humans out of the bottleneck tasks. And then asymptotically, there will be work, but it'll be kind of cherry on top labor. It'll be additive labor that can't be forced out. So in other words,
So this is
maybe
the sex, this is,
it could, yeah, so we could all have sex with each other, right? So maybe we're all doing sex work for each other. This is additive to everything else happening in the economy.
so this is
And
like the horses, we went from 50 million horses in 1900 down to 3 million today.
yeah,
Those 3
but
million,
horses don't own cars. If
those,
horses owned cars, maybe they could support themselves.
those horses are out to pasture. So this is the,
The horse out to pasture here is a euphemism, isn't it?
yes. So this is, so this is the story of humans going out to pasture, being put out to pasture by themselves.
And so the answer is, at least in Pasquale's model, they would not literally have nothing to do. They would just be forced into any labor that is purely additive to like the real important economy.
So, okay, let me ask you this last question, which is, we have fertility rates around the world below reproduction. You know,
True.
in South Korea, it's 0.73 or 76. It's the lowest in the world. Their population is projected to go from 56 million down to 12 million by the end of the century. Uh, if Korea could be, if this vision of AI is true, Korea could be producing a whole lot of stuff without too many people, and those people could be, some of them could be desperately poor, or they could all be desperately poor if the AI is offshore. But they'll, so is this the kind of path of we humans kind of put ourselves out of existence?
Right. So yeah, the
Because,
desperately poor part, it like kind of asks the question there is like, what's the outside option? If the outside option is subsistence farming, then yeah, that would be the desperate poverty. But maybe the outside option is like better than subsistence farming, right? Maybe it's writing poetry for each other, and then like we have a little bit of a dole to able to support that.
well, I would say everybody should look at the paper that Seth and
Right, right.
Mo and
Which
I,
actually plays through the vision that you just described.
which is called Robots Are Us. And it's at my Substack. I have a kind of a description of it, a user-friendly description. Let me just see if I can find it, a link to it. It's called Are We Missing the Real Danger from AI? So I discussed this provocative article that Seth and I and Guillermo uh, uh,
Wrote back when AI was still a glimmer in Sam
back
Altman's
back
mind
in like
brain.
2013, I think, and it still hasn't been published. But I don't know why, but it's
Well,
about
it's because it was too ahead. I mean, Larry, you read the reviewers, and no insult to any distinguished economists who might be listeners of this podcast, but I think it was just a little ahead of its time.
could be. Yeah, that could well be the case. But anyway, Seth, this has been fabulous, and
Ah,
I'm gonna have you back periodically
yeah, I would love
every
to
six
come back
months.
and give you up on the recent research in economics of AI.
Yeah. Well, if you feel like there's another hour's worth that you have, we'll get you back right away.
Amazing.
And thank you again for a very fascinating, yet a second fascinating conversation.
And keep your posteriors justified.